Romain Charles, que nos va a explicar en inglés la parte más científica, ¿no?, del experimento.
Buenos días, but sorry, I will continue in English. My Spanish is not good enough for that. So, Diego introduced the whole trip to Mars, and well, during this trip we had to do a lot of experiments, and this is what I will talk about right now. So those experiments, we can divide them in three big groups. The first one is psychological experiments. So this is one psychological experiment. You can see Diego with a broad smile, full of electrodes. Actually, this experiment is called Pilot, and during the first month of our trip, we learned how to dock a spaceship to the International Space Station. And throughout the whole isolation after, we kept doing that and to see how our skills were improving or decreasing or staying the same, and how our body was reacting to that training that we did. Another psychological experiment is a bit like a video game where you drive a small rover on the Mars surface, but on this one we had also a lot of small, they call it games, but it's more like cognitive experiments, and which would give data to the scientists. And it's the same. We learned how to drive a rover on the Martian surface, and then we continued to drive it and to see how our skills were maintained, decreasing or increasing. So I was doing that on this picture. A third psychological experiment is a very visual one. So this is not an example of Mars 500. This experiment is called social mapping, and the idea is to make a map of the interactions between the different members of the team. So here it's an analysis of the book Romeo and Juliet, and you can see that Romeo and Juliet talk a lot and interact a lot together because they are red and close together, and the people blue don't interact a lot with other people. So in a couple of months now, we should have the same kind of picture for Mars 500 to see what were the interactions between the crew members with ground control, all those interactions. So it will be quite nice to see this picture. The fourth psychological experiment, it's an ESA experiment. We called it blue light, as you can see. The idea is that a few years ago, the scientists noticed that the blue light has a very strong effect on our circadian rhythm. So after more than 15 months inside our modules, this experiment was trying to see if this effect could regulate our circadian rhythm again, our day and night cycles. And doing so, we had some experiments to do every day or every 6 days to check if our circadian rhythm was still okay or not, and how it would affect our efficiency. And now we go to physiological experiments. So we had more than 100 experiments, and some of them were quite strange. Here we have an experiment which is called the pain tolerance experiment. The idea is that we had on our arm here a small plate which was heating more and more. It was hotter and hotter and hotter, and we had to press a button when it was too hot, when it was hurting. So don't worry, it was for the picture. I was doing this face. I would stop before that. And well, the idea for all these experiments was to see how our psychology, our physiology would evolve during those 520 days. So we had to do them again and again and again, and this is what is important, because just doing this experiment once is not very important, but doing this every month gives very valuable data to the scientists. So still on the physiological experiments, this one, we were full of sensors in our body, and this one was looking at our body answers, our blood pressure, cardiac rhythm, and other parameters when standing, sitting, and laying on the bed. And again, we did it every 2 months to see how those parameters and how our reaction to standing, sitting, and laying on the bed would evolve during isolation. So for all these experiments, we will have data in April, and I mean, inside the crew, we are all looking forward to discovering that. Another physiological experiment was about salt absorption. This one was very difficult. On the top left corner, you can see books actually, and each book is the menu for one crew member. So each page of each book was what we had to eat on this day. And I said what we had to eat on that day. So it was very strict, and there were no freedom. We could maybe leave aside one dish, but we had to eat that and that and that. So we had a lot of discussions, conversation around this experiment. You know, the scientist behind this one, we talked a lot about him. And we really enjoyed, after Mars, we had another diet, which was, I mean, we were more free to choose what we wanted to eat, and really enjoyed this freedom. It was great for the first days. Another physiological experiment. This one is looking at what is the effect of training, of sport, on our mood, mainly. So just before training, we would put a cap like this one, and we would record our electroencephalogram. We would do also some questionnaires to see how we feel. Then training for roughly 1 hour, and then just after training, again the electroencephalogram and the questionnaire. So we are still waiting for the results, but first guess is that yes, training is good for your mood. And again, I'm sure that studies have been made about that outside the modules. Here, it was mainly to see if training had a good effect, a better effect, was less efficient after 10 months, after 11 months, see how it evolves. Otherwise, the experiments were done again and again to see the evolution. Here is another European experiment, and you can see Diego, who is sampling some aluminum panels. So here, those experiments that we will see after are more focused on the environment, on the modules, and the operational side of our modules. So this experiment was looking at the coating on different aluminum panels to see if some coating were more efficient to remove or not to be filled with microbes, and to be quite efficient against the microbes. This experiment, Diego already talked about it. This is a Martian rover, so you can see it from the outside this time, and you can see the small, colorful sample that Diego and the Martian crew had to take while driving this rover remotely. This Martian rover on the Martian surface. And and the last operational experiment is the greenhouse. So on the picture here is the greenhouse in space. This experiment was launched by Paolo Nespoli when he was on the International Space Station. A lot of schools, it was an educational experiment. A lot of schools all over Europe followed this experiment and grew some plants in those small greenhouses. And inside our modules, we too grew those plants, and we had seeds, so we're quite happy. We managed to have good plants, even if we did it after 10 months of isolation. So, but those greenhouses were not the only one. We had a big greenhouse where we grew a lot of vegetables, so like tomatoes, sweet pepper, peas, and other herbs to have fresh food to add to our meals. And I can tell you that the first fresh tomato, after 1 year, it was delicious. So mainly, yes, 3 big groups of experiments: psychological, physiological, and environmental experiments. And the main point is really to do them again and again. And the difficulty at the end of the trip was also that Diego talked about it later. It's that after doing 20 times the same experiment with the same subjects, it's kind of difficult to find an interest in it. And the real interest for us is what the scientists will analyze behind it. And we are looking forward, as much as you, I guess, to the results of Mars 500. So now, if you have some questions.